life with Jesus. A call to worship. This is the day
that Christ gathered his disciples in the upper room.
This is the day
That Christ shared the meal with his disciples.
This is the day
That Christ took out our watched disciples eat and showed us how to serve others.
Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover?" He said, "Go into the city to a certain one and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples.'" And the disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When it was evening, he sat at the table with the 12 disciples, and as they were eating, he said, "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were very sorrowful, and began to say to him, one after another, "Is it I, Lord?" He answered, "He who has dipped his hand in the dish with me will betray me. The Son of Man goes as it is written. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born." Judas, who had betrayed him, said, "Is it I, Master?" He said to him, "You have said so."
Now, as they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I shall not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives.
Prayer for God's presence. Creator of heaven and earth, you spoke and ordered words from chaos. Creation is from the form and the light from darkness. You formed us in your image and called us to be your people. You spoke words of truth and law and created us in your image. Through the prophets, you called us to justice and peace. In the fullness of time, your word became flesh and lived among us. And in him we saw your full glory. He shared our human nature. He lived and died as one of us. He taught those who sought to follow his way. He healed the sick and drank with the outcasts, cured the blind, proclaimed the good news of your kingdom. We give you thanks for Christ, for the gift of love and grace. Amen. A humble and powerful act. A humble and powerful act. As Jesus comes to the end of his time of his earthly life, he's celebrating the Passover. And before the Passover, he must do something to show a form of humility and yet a powerful act from servanthood to friendship. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, that he had come from God and returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his borrowed clothing, wrapped the towel around his waist, and then he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around them. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "I wash your feet. You have no part of me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And yet Jesus answered Peter by saying, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. The whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew he was going to be betrayed, and that was the time, and this person was unclean. So unlike us, my brothers and sisters who wear shoes every day, in Jesus' time, they wore sandals. And in the midst of wearing sandals, every time they would come into someone's home and have dinner, it was required that they would wash their feet as a form of cleanliness, as a form of being invited to the table. We're reminded by this humble act 2,000 years ago that Jesus, God in the flesh, God who knew what would be happening to him in a matter of the next 24 hours, said to them, "Let me show you what it means to be a friend." And so Jesus does the most humble of humble things and washes his disciples' feet. And yet we find how much Jesus loved them, because Jesus understood that what was about to happen to him was something that was in God's will. From Old Testament to New, we knew, we've read, that the time would come where the Savior would come into the world and his people would know him not. And yet we find at this moment Jesus showing his disciples how they must love one another in order to know and share the gospel, that we too who sit in First Congregational Church this Thursday would have the gift from being a servant of Jesus to friendship. We too are reminded that the most difficult thing in our lives, we want to have a pity party. But Jesus wasn't ready to have a pity party. Jesus knew what was going to happen to him. And yet he said, those who want to be first must be the very last and servant to all. So this Monday and Thursday, I charge all those who are in attendance and those who are online and those in the world who want to understand Jesus. Forgive. To forgive, you can be first. To bear one another's burdens, you can be first. To love somebody who does not love you, you can be first. To serve someone who can't give you anything in return, you can be first. And so we find Jesus at this moment washing his feet. He gives us the greatest example of friendship to love. And yet finally, he leaves them with this commandment that we too this Thursday is charged with. He said to his disciples, love one another. He said, I repeat, love one another. This new and last commandment I leave with you. Love one another. For by you loving one another, people will know that you are my disciple. Most powerful, most humble act. We see it. Nothing fancy, simple. Yet is it simple? Humility, powerful act. Love, powerful action. But he leaves them with that, because he knows what's going to happen the next day. He knows in the next few minutes when he sits down and has dinner that Judas is going to betray him. He knows that Peter says, I got your back, but no matter what, Jesus, I will not, under no circumstances, turn my back on you. And Jesus says to him, oh, Peter, 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 you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. And yet, despite all of that, he tells them to love one another. And he says, as we prepare for communion this evening, what we're about to do, you will remember. Do this in remembrance of me. A humble and powerful act we all too are charged with. Love one another. For when we love, God loves us. It's because God said, you love because I first loved. You give because I first gave. You forgive because I first forgave. You share each other's burdens because I shared my burden on you when I go to the cross tomorrow. And that's what we're reminded of. This tradition, that the night before this Passover meal, this Seder meal, he washes their feet and serves them communion. And then he goes in the garden and agonizes and asks God, is there another way for me to do this? And then he says, not my will, but your will be done. Is there another way for you to do it? Not our will, not your will, but his will be done. Amen. Remembering the story, on the night he was betrayed, Jesus took bread. When he gave thanks and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat this. This is my body, given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." After supper, he took the cup. And when he gave thanks, he gave it, saying, "Drink this, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me."
Turn around.
Oh, right there. Did you not tell me that? Prayer of thanksgiving. Holy God, on the night Jesus gave his disciples a new commandment, to love one another as he loved them. Write this commandment on our hearts and strengthen us in service, in unity, and in love. And in the words of Jesus we pray. The Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thou is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. On the night of his arrest, Jesus gave the disciples a new commandment and set an example for them by washing their feet. In the act of service, he reminded them to care for and serve one another. Remember your baptism, and remember you are called to serve humbly as Christ has served us.
Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go yonder and pray." And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt." And when he came to the disciples and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "So, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, thy will be done. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners.
While he was still speaking, Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, The one I shall kiss is the man, seize him. And he came up to Jesus at once and said, Hail, Master! And he kissed him. Jesus said to him, Friend, why are you here? Then they came up and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. Then Jesus said to him, Put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so? At that hour, Jesus said to the crowds, Have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But all of this has taken place, that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled.
From this moment, we move to the cross. It is a solemn time, a time of reflection. So we invite you to take your time and to leave the sanctuary in the silence of the shadows.